What if the bones of giants were not just the stuff of myth and fairy tales, but the remains of a species that once walked the earth? What if human history is not the story of the tallest, strongest beings to ever live, but of their smaller descendants, who inherited the world after the giants fell? The question strikes like a spark in dry tinder. It burns not because it is likely, but because it feels possible. The earth, after all, has never been static. Life has twisted itself into improbable forms countless times. Dragonflies the size of seagulls, ferns taller than skyscrapers, reptiles so massive they made the ground quake. If such creatures thrived in the deep past, why not intelligent giants? Why not a race of towering hominids who built, fought, ruled, and then vanished, leaving us, diminished heirs, to puzzle over their shadows? In every corner of human culture, giants appear. They loom in myths, in sacred texts, in folklore passed from campfire to castle. From the Titans of Greece to the Nephilim of the Bible, from Norse frost giants to the Rakshasas of India, stories repeat with uncanny similarity. Colossal beings, powerful yet flawed, locked in conflict with humans or gods. Why do we tell these stories everywhere, across continents separated by oceans? Is it coincidence, archetype, or is it memory? The scientist in us hesitates. Evolution, we are told, is efficient. Larger bodies require more food, more oxygen, more energy. Giants would be evolutionary liabilities, not advantages. And yet, the imagination rebels. Could a shift in climate, in gravity, in atmospheric composition have opened a path where larger hominids thrived? If insects once grew to monstrous size in the Carboniferous swamps, fueled by higher oxygen, might there not have been an age when humans, too, stretched skyward? To consider giants is to step into a twilight zone between reason and wonder. On one side lies biology, with its charts of hominid skulls, its timelines of slow progression from ape to human. On the other side lies myth, with its towering warriors and world-shaping beings. Between them lies a question mark. What if evolution took a different turn? What if those myths are not exaggerations, but fossils of memory? Stories born from encounters with beings larger than ourselves. The hook is simple, almost childlike in its boldness. Giants once ruled the earth. The premise is vast. It forces us to imagine cities scaled for bodies twice our height, tools and weapons too large for human hands, wars fought with thunderous force, agriculture tilled by strides that covered fields in moments. It challenges us to rethink not only history, but humanity itself. Perhaps we are not the pinnacle, but the understudies, playing on a stage once dominated by taller actors. And behind the speculation lurks unease. For if giants existed and vanished, then greatness does not guarantee survival. They may have fallen to the same traps Plato ascribed to Atlantis: arrogance, overreach, environmental collapse. Or perhaps their downfall was simpler. They were too big to last. The earth, with its shifting climates and scarce resources, may have favored the smaller, the nimbler, the adaptable. In their ruin lies our rise. We are here because they are gone. This premise is not comfortable, but it is compelling. It destabilizes the tidy story of human evolution, where we imagine ourselves the inevitable outcome of natural selection. It suggests instead that we are only one branch on a tree of possibilities, and that taller branches once reached higher, only to snap and fall into oblivion. And it also awakens something deeper: awe. There is a reason myths of giants thrill us even now. They speak to our fascination with scale, with beings that make us feel small, humble, fragile.
They embody power unrestrained, bodies that dwarf mountains, footsteps that shake valleys. To imagine them as real is to admit that we are not the only giants of history, that we may, in fact, be the smallest survivors of a grander age. So we begin here with a question disguised as a story disguised as a memory. What if evolution took another path? What if in some forgotten epoch, giants ruled the earth? And what if their bones still lie beneath our feet, waiting for us to rediscover not only their size, but their legacy?
If giants once walked the earth, then the question we must first confront is scientific. Could such beings even exist? Myth and imagination are generous. They have no limits. Biology, however, is less forgiving. It binds life to the constraints of physics and chemistry, to gravity and metabolism, to oxygen levels and ecological balance. To test the possibility of giants is to ask how far evolution can stretch the rules of life. The first law of size is simple. The bigger you are, the harder life becomes. Weight increases faster than strength. Muscles and bones scale with cross-sectional area, but mass scales with volume. A creature twice as tall as a human is not twice as heavy, it is 8 times as heavy. Every step becomes more punishing, every fall more catastrophic. Hearts must pump harder, lungs must pull more oxygen, and joints must bear crushing loads. The larger the body, the greater the struggle against gravity itself. And yet, nature has produced giants before. The dinosaurs towered over trees, their necks stretching stories high. Mammoths and mastodons once thundered across plains. Even insects in the deep past reached impossible sizes. Dragonflies with wingspans as wide as hawks. These were not fantasies but realities, shaped by environmental conditions different from today. Higher oxygen levels in the Carboniferous allowed insects to grow large because diffusion, not lungs, fueled their breath. Dinosaurs flourished in warm, oxygen-rich climates with abundant vegetation. Life has proven, time and again, that gigantism is not impossible, it is conditional. So what conditions might allow for giants of the human kind? Imagine an Earth with slightly less gravity, perhaps a world with the same mass but a broader radius, softening the pull on every step. Or an atmosphere richer in oxygen, easing the strain on massive lungs. Or ecosystems abundant enough to feed colossal appetites without collapse. Under such circumstances, evolution might not select for smaller, efficient bodies, but for taller, stronger ones. Giants could emerge not as freaks of nature, but as the favored children of their age. Even on our Earth, gigantism is not unknown. Medical Modern recognizes acromegaly and pituitary disorders that cause extraordinary growth. History records individuals over 8 feet tall, men and women who, despite fragile health, demonstrate that the blueprint of humanity can stretch far beyond the average. If mutations and hormones can create giants among us now, could they not, under different pressures, have shaped entire populations in the past? Skeptics point out the limits. A 12-foot-tall human would struggle with brittle bones, fragile joints, and a heart prone to failure. Evolution, ever pragmatic, would avoid such inefficiencies. But what if those limits were mitigated by adaptation? Stronger bone density, different circulatory structures, more efficient oxygen transport. Traits that might evolve if size were advantageous. Evolution asks not what is likely, but what is possible for life. And what could make size advantageous? In an age of predators, larger bodies mean strength and intimidation. In a time of plentiful resources, they mean dominance over smaller rivals. In social structures, they could mean authority, awe, and power. Perhaps in some forgotten epoch, size was survival, and evolution answered accordingly. There is another clue. Our fascination with giants is not just mythic, but psychological. Humans instinctively admire height. Taller leaders are often judged stronger, more commanding. Could this bias be the residue of an ancient truth, that once size truly did confer dominance, not only in stories, but in life?
Perhaps our myths of giants are not inventions but echoes, faint memories of an evolutionary branch that rose tall before us. Of course, science deals in evidence, and here the trail runs thin. No verified skeletons, giants rest in museums, no archaeological record confirms their reign. But absence of proof is not proof of absence. The fossil record is fragmentary at best. Entire species have lived and died without leaving more than a trace. Could a population of giants have walked the earth, their bones lost to time, their memory preserved only in myth? It is unlikely, but not impossible. And that slim crack of possibility is all imagination requires. For if evolution is the great experimenter, why not envision a path where giants succeeded? Why not imagine a human lineage where stature stretched to double or triple our own, where strength and size shaped not only biology, but culture, cities, and history? The science does not close the door. It merely sets the conditions. Giants are improbable in our world, under our gravity, with our atmosphere. But under different skies, with different air, with different pressures, they might have been not only possible, but inevitable. So the premise stands. Giants could have existed if Earth or evolution had bent just slightly differently. And that is enough to keep the question alive. Because science may set the boundaries, but within those boundaries, imagination builds worlds. And somewhere in those worlds, giants still walk.
Every legend demands relics, physical traces that seem to anchor story in stone. For Atlantis, it was sunken walls and mysterious maps. For giants, it is bones. Great bones. Bones too large for ordinary men, dug up from fields, caves, and riverbeds, whispered to be the remains of a race that once towered over us. The record of such discoveries is both tantalizing and troubled. In the 19th century, newspapers across America brimmed with reports of giant skeletons unearthed in mounds and farmlands. Skulls twice the normal size, femurs too long to belong to any living human, even whole skeletons said to measure over 10 feet in height. Farmers stumbled upon them while plowing. Amateur diggers pulled them from ancient burial mounds built by native peoples. For a moment, the nation was spellbound. Had the Bible's talk of giants in the earth been vindicated? But most of these finds dissolved into smoke. Some were hoaxes, staged with clever carpentry or reshaped animal bones. Others were exaggerations, the product of faulty measurement or journalistic sensationalism. A few may have been genuine, but disappeared into private collections or lost before scientists could verify them. The Smithsonian Institution, often accused by conspiracy theorists of hiding giant bones, became a focal point of suspicion. Was there a cover-up to protect orthodox science, or were the bones simply never real? Yet the whispers never stopped. In Europe, reports surfaced of enormous skeletal remains buried in caves. In Asia, folklore told of excavated bones thought to belong to dragons, though some were large enough to suggest massive humans. In the deserts of the Middle East, travelers spoke of graves where the femurs stretched longer than a man's arm. None of these claims survived rigorous examination, but together they wove a pattern too enticing to dismiss entirely. Science offers explanations. Giant bones could be mammoth remains, misidentified by untrained eyes. Large skulls may belong to extinct megafauna. Stories of giants often emerge from cultures encountering fossils without the context of modern paleontology. But imagination takes those explanations and asks, what if? What if even one of those skeletons was real? The fossil record itself provides shadows that tempt speculation. Homo heidelbergensis,
a human ancestor, stood taller and stronger than modern humans, some approaching 7 feet in height. Neanderthals were shorter but powerfully built, with bones that suggested immense strength. The Denisovans, known only from fragments, remain a mystery. What if they too were giants? Even among Homo sapiens, individuals with gigantism have reached 8 or 9 feet, proving that our species can stretch beyond its average scale. Scale these anomalies into populations, and suddenly the myth of giants seems less impossible. Then there are the outliers that ignite conspiracy. Photographs of enormous skeletons found in India circulating online with claims of archaeological suppression. Images of skulls with elongated crania, interpreted as proof of non-human or giant races. Most have been debunked as digital manipulations or misinterpretations, yet the fascination persists. Each new giant skeleton discovered online attracts millions of views, as though humanity is collectively waiting for the one find that cannot be dismissed. Why do these fossil teasers hold such power? Because they sit on the edge of plausibility. We know large humans exist. We know ancient species of hominids were stronger, more robust than us. We know fossils often fool the eye. Into this uncertain space steps the dream of giants, not as fairy tale ogres, but as flesh and blood beings who might once have towered over our ancestors. The real mystery may not be whether giant skeletons exist, but why we want them to. What does it mean to imagine bones larger than our own, buried beneath our fields? Perhaps it is the thrill of reversal. We, who rule the earth, might not have always been the masters. Perhaps smaller humans once lived in the shadow of larger kin, dwarfed not only in stature, but in power. To believe in giant bones is to accept that we inherited the earth by accident, not destiny. Science, cautious as always, reminds us extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. And so far, no museum has unveiled an authenticated skeleton of a 10-foot man. Yet the fossil teasers keep surfacing, in rumors, in photographs, in yellowed newspaper clippings. They haunt the edges of archaeology, as if daring us to dig deeper. Maybe in some remote cave, beneath layers of sediment untouched for millennia, a real skeleton waits, not a hoax, not a misidentified mammoth, but a giant, its bones heavy with truth, its skull staring upward as if remembering the days when its kind ruled the earth. Until then, we live with fragments and whispers, the fossil teasers that keep the possibility alive.
Long before archaeologists dug into mounds or paleontologists puzzled over bones, humanity already knew giants. They walked through our stories, roared in our epics, and loomed in our sacred texts. Across continents, across languages, across ages, the pattern is astonishingly consistent. Tales of beings far larger than ordinary humans, beings of immense strength and appetite, beings who either warred against the gods or ruled before humankind inherited the earth. Consider the Greeks, who gave us the Titans. Born of Uranus and Gaia, sky and earth, they were the first rulers of the cosmos. Their strength was so great that even Zeus trembled until he defeated them in the Titanomachy, banishing them to Tartarus. Later came the Gigantes, the giants who rose against Olympus in a cataclysmic struggle. The myths frame these colossal beings as primordial forces, embodiments of chaos that had to be subdued before order could reign. The Bible, too, is populated with giants. In Genesis, we hear of the Nephilim. There were giants in the earth in those days. These beings, born of the sons of God and the daughters of men, were mighty and fearsome. Later, in the book of Numbers, Israelite scouts report encountering people so tall that they felt like grasshoppers in comparison. And, of course, the tale of David and Goliath has become the archetype of the small overcoming the giant, a symbol that still resonates today. Journey north, and the Norse myths give us the Jotnar, the frost giants who dwelt in Jotunheim. They were not merely enemies, but necessary opposites to the gods: wildness against order, destruction against creation. Thor himself, hammer in hand, spent much of his mythic career clashing with these towering adversaries. When Ragnarok comes, the end of the world, the giants march once more, signaling that the ancient struggle is eternal. In India, Hindu epics describe the Rakshasas, often depicted as monstrous, sometimes towering. Though not always giants in the literal sense of size, their depictions lean toward excess, immense strength, grotesque power, appetites larger than life. In the Mahabharata and the Ramayana, these beings clash with heroes in wars that feel eerily parallel to Greek and Norse battles against giants. Even in the Americas, the pattern persists. Native American traditions speak of giant beings. The Sioux told of the Chie-Tonka, large men with red hair who lived long ago. The Paiutes told of the Siteka, a race of cannibalistic giants, eventually wiped out by their ancestors. Across the ocean, in Polynesia, myths tell of massive ancestral beings who shaped the land itself, lifting mountains and carving valleys. What explains this universality? Why do cultures separated by oceans tell such similar tales? One possibility is archetype. Giants embody the human struggle against forces greater than ourselves. To the Greeks, they were chaos. To the Norse, frost and destruction. To the Hebrews, corruption before the flood. Each culture shaped its giants to reflect its fears. Another possibility is memory. Perhaps there truly were encounters with unusually tall peoples, with remnants of extinct hominids, with bones of megafauna mistaken for human that seeded these myths. But there is another subtler explanation. Giants may symbolize scale itself, the way the world can overwhelm us. A thunderstorm, a mountain, a roaring river all feel like giants, larger than life, dangerous but awe-inspiring. By giving those forces human form, myth made them comprehensible. Giants became the personification of nature's immensity, the embodiment of the truth that humanity is small in a vast and hostile world. And yet, myths also suggest intimacy. Giants are often portrayed not as distant gods, but as beings who interact directly with humans, sometimes violently, sometimes even intermarrying. They are not untouchable. They are rivals, neighbors, enemies. They make the cosmos personal. And perhaps that is why the stories endure. Giants bridge the gap between myth and history, between imagination and the possibility of memory. Patterns like these make skeptics pause. Why do they ask, do cultures with no contact describe beings so similar? Flood myths are also nearly universal, and some argue they stem from shared memories of Ice Age disasters. Could the same be true of giants? Could encounters with tall, powerful tribes have echoed across generations, swelling into legend? Could oversized bones of mastodons or mammoths, mistaken for human, have sparked tales of gigantic men? The mythic pattern does not prove giants were real, but it does prove they were necessary. Necessary to explain why the world felt overwhelming. Necessary to dramatize the struggle between order and chaos. Necessary to personify the primal fear of being small. Whether memory or metaphor, the result is the same. A chorus of voices across time, all singing the same refrain.
once there were giants. And perhaps, just perhaps, myths preserve more than imagination. Myths are memory wrapped in symbol, history clothed in story. What if buried beneath exaggeration and metaphor, there lies a kernel of truth? What if the Titans, the Nephilim, the Jotnar, the Rakshasas were distorted recollections of real beings, taller than ordinary humans, remembered by those who saw them not as equals, but as giants? That is the puzzle. Myth cannot prove, but it cannot be dismissed. It draws lines across the map of the world, pointing to a possibility that evolution alone cannot explain away. Giants are everywhere, in story if not in bone, and their persistence is its own kind of evidence.
Every myth wears two faces, the literal and the symbolic. Giants, whether Titans, Nephilim, or frostborn Jotnar, are not only beings of impossible size, they are ideas given flesh. They stand less as biological curiosities and more as archetypes, expressions of truths too vast for ordinary language. When cultures tell stories of giants, they're speaking less about creatures and more about conditions of existence: chaos, ambition, power, vulnerability. At the simplest level, giants embody scale. Humans have always lived in the shadow of immensities: mountains, oceans, storms, the sky itself. To imagine beings as tall as cliffs or as wide as valleys is to make those immensities relatable. A giant is a thunderstorm you can see, a mountain with a face, an avalanche with a voice. Through giants, nature's scale becomes personal, and thus a story can be told about it. They also embody conflict. Giants, without almost exception, oppose the gods or the heroes. In Greece, the Titans resisted Olympus. In Norse myth, the Jotnar constantly clashed with the Aesir. In the Hebrew Bible, giants represented corruption, wiped out by divine flood. These conflicts are not just battles, they're dramas of order against chaos, culture against wilderness, restraint against excess. Giants serve as foils, reminding us that growth unchecked becomes monstrosity, that power without wisdom becomes destruction. And yet, giants are not always villains. Some traditions paint them as teachers or ancestors. In certain Native American legends, giants brought knowledge or resources before being cast out. In Irish mythology, the giant Fionn mac Cúil is less a monster and more a hero of extraordinary size and strength. Even in Norse stories, some giants are wise, offering counsel to gods and men alike. Here the archetype shifts: giants as primal ancestors, carriers of knowledge too raw for ordinary mortals. Psychologically, giants also represent the fears and desires within us. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, might have called them shadow figures, symbols of forces repressed or denied. Giants embody hunger, lust, aggression, all in excess. They eat too much, fight too much, want too much. They are humanity's appetites externalized and magnified. To fight a giant, in story, is to fight our own overindulgence, our own arrogance, our own chaos. This is why so many giant stories end with a smaller hero's victory. David defeats Goliath. Thor smashes giants with Mjolnir. Theseus and Heracles best monsters of impossible size. The moral is always clear. Intelligence, cunning, or divine favor outweigh brute force. Humanity's survival depends not on being the biggest, but on being the cleverest. Giants, in this way, reassure us of our place in the world. Even if we are small, we can prevail.
but giants also inspire awe. There is something magnetic about imagining beings so much larger than ourselves. They stir a strange blend of fear and longing. To be small in their presence is terrifying, but to be like them is tempting. They are what we wish to be and what we dread to become. In this way, giants embody both extremes of aspiration, the dream of transcendence and the nightmare of excess. Consider also how giants often live at the margins, at the edges of maps, in remote mountains, in frozen wastes. They are not neighbors, but distant others. This too is archetypal. Giants represent the unknown, the unexplored, the untamed. They are the guardians of thresholds, standing between civilization and wilderness, known and unknown. To encounter them is to test the limits of human courage. And yet, archetypes have a way of blurring into reality. What if these symbolic beings were inspired by actual encounters with peoples who seemed gigantic to their neighbors? A tribe of unusually tall warriors might become God-sized in memory. The bones of a mastodon might be woven into the image of a man. Over generations, the line between symbol and fact dissolves. Giants, then, may be both mythic archetypes and echoes of real encounters. What matters most is not whether they lived, but what they mean. Giants are metaphors of scale, excess, and struggle. They warn us of arrogance, remind us of limits, and reassure us that intelligence can triumph over brute power. They embody the truth that humanity has always lived in the shadow of forces larger than itself, and that survival depends on recognizing those forces, not ignoring them. So when cultures remember giants, they are not merely telling fairy tales. They are dramatizing the eternal human condition, smallness in the face of the vast. The giant is the storm we cannot control, the hunger we cannot fully satisfy, the ambition that swells until it bursts. To wrestle giants, whether in myth or in life, is to wrestle with ourselves.
If giants once ruled the Earth, then the planet itself must have been different. Our present conditions, gravity, oxygen levels, ecosystems, do not favor humanoids much taller than the largest among us today. For giants to thrive, evolution would have needed a different stage. So let us imagine the Earth that could have been, a world whose very physics and climate nurtured bodies twice, 3 times, even 4 times the size of modern humans. Start with gravity. On our Earth, the pull of gravity places harsh limits on size. Muscles and bones strengthen by area, while weight increases by volume. Double a body's height and its mass multiplies 8-fold. Joints buckle, hearts labor, lungs gasp. But reduce gravity even slightly, and the calculus changes. With less downward pull, a 10-foot being might stride with ease. If Earth had been larger in radius but similar in mass, a bloated twin, gravity could have been weaker at the surface. A world like that would have invited giants to rise, not stumble. Then there is oxygen. In the Carboniferous period, over 300 million years ago, oxygen levels soared to about 35% compared to today's 21%. In that lush, swampy world, insects grew monstrous. Dragonflies with wingspans like hawks, millipedes longer than crocodiles. Why? Because higher oxygen made breathing easier, diffusion faster, metabolisms more efficient. Imagine a similar epoch overlapping with human evolution. Lungs that now struggle to feed an 8-foot body might have easily fueled giants of 12 or 15 feet. A richer atmosphere could have been the hidden ally of titans. Diet, too, matters. Giants require food, staggering amounts of it. Modern elephants consume hundreds of pounds of vegetation daily, and they are not bipedal tool users, but quadrupeds with endless access to forests and grasses. For giant hominids to flourish, the earth must have been more abundant. Fields overflowing with calories, seas teeming with protein, fruit and grain in unimaginable supply. Perhaps such abundance existed in forgotten intervals after the Ice Age, when newly warmed climates created Edenic landscapes, or perhaps giants ruled regions where nature still offered lavish feasts, river valleys bursting with megafauna, coastal plains dense with fish and fruit. Consider also resilience. Larger beings would need more robust circulatory systems, stronger bones, denser tissues. Evolution could have provided them. Whales, after all, reach 90 feet and weigh over 100 tons. Giraffes, with their elongated necks, pump blood against gravity with massive hearts. Life has solved the engineering problem of size many times before. Why not in a humanoid form under conditions that favored it? This Earth that could have been may not be purely speculative. Our own world once hosted giant mammals, mammoths, mastodons, cave bears, and ground sloths the size of elephants. Early humans lived beside them, hunted them, feared them. Might they also have lived beside a branch of humanity scaled to match them? Fossils suggest diversity we are still discovering. Neanderthals, Denisovans, Homo floresiensis. Some were smaller than us, some more robust. Who is to say another branch did not stretch upward instead of outward, rising into stature we now call impossible? There is also the tantalizing thought that giant humans might have thrived in places now lost. Coastlines have shifted dramatically, seas have risen hundreds of feet since the last ice age. Vast stretches of fertile land lie drowned beneath oceans. If giants lived there, their world may have been erased. Their bones swallowed, their cities silted over. Earth has erased more histories than it has preserved. But this alternate Earth carries warnings as well. Larger bodies burn brighter but faster. Giants might have dominated briefly, only to collapse when climate shifted, oxygen dwindled, or food grew scarce. In this sense, their world was fragile, balanced on conditions that could not last. They may have been doomed by biology, their grandeur unsustainable. Evolution, pragmatic and merciless, favored the smaller, the efficient, the adaptable. In their fall, our rise became inevitable. To dream of giants, then, is to glimpse a parallel Earth, one where evolution favored scale, where oxygen-rich skies nurtured lungs the size of barrels, where gravity was gentle enough to let titans walk. An Earth where villages lay in the shadows of colossal beings, where stories of thunderous footsteps were not metaphor but memory. Our world is not that Earth, but it might have been. And the faint possibility that conditions once aligned for such creatures, that biology could have permitted them, keeps the myth alive. Giants may never have ruled this Earth, but they remain a vision of the Earth that could have been. A reminder that evolution is not destiny, but improvisation, and that the world could have unfolded in stranger ways than we dare imagine.
When we gaze at the world's great megaliths, stones stacked higher than houses, blocks weighing hundreds of tons, moved with uncanny precision, we ask the same question again and again. How? How did ancient peoples, with no cranes, no engines, no steel, raise monuments that still defy our imagination? For some, the answer is giants. Consider Baalbek in modern-day Lebanon. There lies the Trilithon, 3 stones, each weighing around 800 tons, fitted into a temple platform. Nearby lies the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, estimated at over 1,000 tons. To this day, engineers puzzle over how such massive blocks could have been quarried, transported, and placed with ancient technology. Ropes and sledges, wooden rollers, or the bare hands of beings larger and stronger than us? In the folklore of the region, the answer is clear. Giants built Baalbek. Travel west to Britain, and Stonehenge rises from the Salisbury Plain. Its great stones, transported from quarries miles away, arranged in a circle aligned with celestial events, have long inspired theories of magic and mystery. Medieval chroniclers even suggested that giants placed the stones there, later moved by Merlin, the wizard. The legend is less about fact than about scale. The stones seemed too heavy for ordinary men, so extraordinary builders were imagined. In South America, the walls of Sacsayhuaman, near Cusco, reveal stones so massive and so perfectly fitted that a knife blade cannot slide between them. Local Inca legends spoke of Viracota, a godlike figure, and of giants who helped shape the world. In Easter Island, the colossal Moai statues stare inland, their creation still partly mysterious. Again and again, folklore points to builders larger than life. Mainstream archaeology offers explanations: ropes, ramps, ingenuity, and sheer manpower. The ancients were cleverer and more organized than we often give them credit for. With enough time and labor, even impossible tasks become possible. But for those captivated by the myth of giants, these explanations feel incomplete. Why choose stones so absurdly large when smaller blocks would suffice? Why attempt feats that strain even modern machinery? Perhaps the builders were not like us. Perhaps scale made sense to them because they themselves were scaled differently. The theory goes further. If giants existed, they would not only have built monuments, they would have shaped civilizations. Their height and strength would have given them dominance. Their presence in myth as rulers, kings, and even gods might reflect historical memories of giant overlords. Imagine temples built to their scale, cities designed for strides twice the length of ours, tools and weapons too large for human hands. Could the ruins we puzzle over today have been perfectly ordinary in a world where builders were giants? Of course, science demands caution. No authenticated artifacts scaled to giant proportions have been found. Tools fit human hands, not titans. Skeletons of normal-sized workers lie buried near pyramids, not oversized bones. And yet, anomalies persist. Stone blocks so massive they seem unnecessary. Myths so consistent they beg explanation. It is in this gap between evidence and imagination that the theory thrives. What makes the lost civilizations theory compelling is not proof, but resonance. The monuments exist, they are real. They are enormous, mysterious, and undeniably impressive. Giants provide a narrative that matches their scale. The stones are colossal because the builders were colossal. The myths tell of giants because people remembered them. The grandeur of the ruins demands grandeur in their makers. And perhaps there is truth, if not literal, then symbolic. Giants need not have lifted stones themselves to inspire the legends. Perhaps tribes of unusually tall people, remembered as larger than life, oversaw construction. Perhaps myths grew as ordinary humans, awed by their ancestors' achievements, could only explain them by imagining builders of supernatural size. Giants, then, are less about fact than about awe, a way of honoring works that seemed too vast for human hands alone. Yet the theory lingers, stubborn and seductive. It lingers because the stones are still there, daring us to match them. It lingers because we want the past to be stranger, more wondrous, more filled with hidden chapters than textbooks allow. And it lingers because, deep down, we are not satisfied with explanations that make the extraordinary ordinary. Giants keep the mystery alive, refusing to let us shrink the past into something smaller than it deserves.
So when we walk among the megaliths, when we stand before Baalbek's stones, or touch the weathered flanks of Stonehenge, or gaze at the Moai under starlight, we are not just tourists, we are participants in an ancient question. Who built this and how? The archaeologist says ropes and ramps. The legend says giants. Between them lies a story still waiting to be told.
If giants once ruled the earth, their shadows should appear in the oldest texts, the places where myth and memory blur into scripture, saga, and epic. And indeed, turn the brittle pages of antiquity and you will find them everywhere. Vast figures striding across the margins of human history, half forgotten but never absent. The Bible is perhaps the most famous source. In Genesis 6:4, a cryptic verse reads, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them." These beings are called the Nephilim, mighty, fearsome, renowned. Later in the book of Numbers, Israelite scouts returning from Canaan report, "All the people that we saw in it are of great stature, and there we saw the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers." To the faithful, these verses are history. To scholars, they are myth layered over ancient encounters. Either way, the impression is the same. At the dawn of civilization, humanity remembered beings much larger than themselves. Move to Greece, and you find the Gigantomachy, the great war between gods and giants. Vase paintings and temple carvings show immense figures clashing with Olympians, their bodies towering, their strength terrible. These were not clumsy ogres, but cunning adversaries, requiring the combined might of the gods to defeat. The Titans, too, loom in Hesiod's theogony, primal rulers cast down by Zeus. Such tales are not idle fantasies, they are cultural memories dramatized into myth, encoding struggles with forces too great to name. Norse mythology adds its chorus. In the poetic Edda, the Jotnar dwell in Jotunheim, beings of immense power who continually clash with the Aesir gods. Some are monstrous, some wise, some indistinguishable from humans but for their stature. The frost giant Ymir, in particular, is said to have been so vast that his body became the world itself, flesh the land, blood the seas, bones the mountains. Here the giant is not merely an adversary, but the raw material of creation. Further east in India's Ramayana, Rakshasas appear, powerful beings, some towering and terrifying, others shapeshifters and tricksters. Ravana, the great demon king, is often described as immense, his strength far beyond mortal men. In the Mahabharata, too, references emerge to warriors and beings of abnormal size, blending the human with the superhuman. Across the ocean, the Americas hold their own testimonies. The Paiute of Nevada tell of the Saitika, red-haired giants who warred with their ancestors. According to legend, these beings were finally trapped in a cave and burned alive. When Lovelock Cave was excavated in the early 20th century, unusually large sandals and bones were reportedly found, though later dismissed or lost. Among the Sioux, tales survive of giant people who once roamed the plains. Among the Maya, myths speak of ancient races of massive stature, destroyed by the gods for their arrogance. What unites these stories is not detail, but theme. Giants appear as rulers of a previous age, undone by catastrophe, hubris, or divine judgment. They represent a time when humanity was small, when power belonged to others. Sometimes they are villains, devourers of men. Sometimes they are builders and teachers. But always they are larger than life, both literally and symbolically. Skeptics argue these texts are allegory. The Nephilim symbolize corruption before the flood. The Titans in Jotnar embody chaos defeated by order. The Rakshasas are moralized depictions of human vice. Yet even allegory may preserve memory. Myths exaggerate, but they rarely arise from nothing. Could it be that in the dawn of our species, when Homo sapiens still shared the world with Neanderthals, Denisovans, or other robust hominids, encounters with giant kin became the seeds of these enduring tales? A 7-foot warrior would seem monstrous to a 5-foot tribesman. A band of tall, powerful strangers might inspire stories that echo thousands of years later. Ancient texts invite us to entertain this possibility. They speak of giants not as fairy tales told to children, but as history, woven into genealogies and sacred wars. Their presence is always consequential, shaping the destinies of nations, defining the boundaries of gods and men. To dismiss them entirely as fantasy is to ignore how deeply the memory of giants runs in the veins of human culture. And so the question lingers. When we read of Nephilim, Titans, Jotnar, Rakshasas, Saitaka, are we reading only stories, or are we hearing echoes of encounters long buried beneath time? Perhaps the ancient scribes did not invent giants. Perhaps they remembered them.
Science is not blind to myth. It studies it, probes it, tests it against evidence. And when the subject is giants, science offers both dismissals and tantalizing possibilities. Myths may not be literal, scholars argue, but they are rarely arbitrary. They grow from soil rich with experience, misunderstanding, and sometimes fragments of truth. The giants of ancient texts, then, may not be fantasy alone. They may be distorted memories of biology, encounters, and bones that science is still unraveling. Start with biology. Gigantism is a medical condition known today. Caused by abnormalities in the pituitary gland, it results in excessive production of growth hormone. Famous cases include Robert Wadlow, who reached 8 feet 11 inches before his early death in 1940. Even in antiquity, such individuals must have existed. To a society where the average height was closer to 5 feet, a man towering at 7 or 8 feet would appear monstrous, perhaps even divine. Over generations, stories of these individuals could easily swell into legends of entire races of giants. Then there are the bones. For centuries, farmers and explorers have unearthed massive skeletons, not human, but mistaken as such. Mammoth femurs, mastodon skulls, and the remains of other Ice Age megafauna resemble human bones enough to fool untrained eyes. A tusk may look like a giant's rib. A skull with missing tusks may resemble a huge human cranium. Imagine a villager stumbling upon such remains with no knowledge of paleontology. What conclusion could they draw, except that giants once lived? Anthropology adds another layer. Throughout human evolution, multiple hominid species coexisted. Some were smaller, like Homo floresiens, the hobbits of Indonesia. Others were larger and more robust. Neanderthals were shorter on average, but powerfully built with thick bones and immense strength. Homo heidelbergensis sometimes exceeded 6 feet, far taller than many of their contemporaries. The Denisovans remain largely unknown, but genetic evidence suggests they interbred with humans. To early Homo sapiens, encountering these others could have felt like meeting giants or monsters. Over millennia, such encounters might survive only in myth. Science also points to psychology. Humans are storytellers. We exaggerate. We amplify. An unusually tall warrior becomes Goliath. A tribe stronger than others becomes the Nephilim. A storm or earthquake becomes the wrath of gods, embodied as giants. Myth grows not from lies, but from human need to make sense of the overwhelming. Giants are in this view metaphors, born from kernels of truth. Yet there are puzzles that keep the debate alive. Certain archaeological sites contain human remains larger than expected. Though often explained as pathology, they hint at diversity within the human past. And the near universality of giant myths across cultures continues to trouble skeptics. Why giants everywhere, if not inspired by something real? Why not myths of tiny people ruling the earth, or winged humans, or scaled ones? Why always beings bigger, stronger, looming over us? Science shrugs, but uneasily. Myths of giants are too consistent, too persistent to dismiss entirely. Perhaps they are collective memory of tall tribes. Perhaps they are fossil misinterpretations, repeated until they solidified into tradition. Or perhaps they are archetypes bubbling from the human psyche wherever people confront forces larger than themselves. The dialogue between science and myth reveals a deeper truth. Giants live in the overlap between what we know and what we fear. Biology explains gigantism, paleontology explains bones, anthropology explains encounters. Myth exaggerates all three into stories that endure. Giants are at once real and unreal, factual and fictional. They walk in the twilight where evidence ends and imagination begins. And maybe that twilight is the point. Myths do not need to be literally true to hold meaning. They encode experience, awe, and memory in ways science alone cannot. Giants are symbols of scale, but they may also be distorted recollections of real beings magnified through centuries of retelling. Science grounds them, myth inflates them, and together they create a story too resilient to vanish. So, do giants exist? In a strict biological sense, science says no. No race of 12-foot humans has ever been confirmed. But in another sense, giants exist everywhere. In the bones mistaken for theirs, in the genetic anomalies that produce towering individuals, in the encounters with other hominids who seem strange and powerful. And in myth, they exist eternally, because the human mind cannot help but imagine beings larger than itself. Thus, science meets myth not in denial, but in dialogue. Giants may not have ruled the earth, but the possibility that they almost could have, that evolution nearly took that path, remains a haunting echo in our species' imagination.
Close your eyes and step into a world where the giants are not myth, but rulers. Imagine a civilization where the average person towers at 12 or 15 feet, where the scale of everything, cities, tools, even the rhythm of daily life, is magnified beyond our comprehension. What would such a world look like? First, the architecture. Cities of giants would not be built for fragile hands. Their buildings would rise like fortresses, walls thick as cliffs, doors taller than our houses. Stone, not wood, would be the material of choice. Massive blocks cut and stacked with precision. To us, they would resemble megaliths or cyclopean ruins, but to them, they would be ordinary dwellings. Temples would be mountains of marble, their columns like redwoods, their steps each the height of a man. Even tools, hammers, plows, weapons would dwarf our bodies. What we see as monuments, they would see as furniture. Then, the landscape of labor. Farming for giants would require sweeping gestures. A single stride might cross a field. A single plow might carve furrows yards deep. Their livestock would need to be proportionately larger. Massive cattle, sheep like boulders of wool, horses broad as trucks. Fishing boats would be the size of our freighters, nets heavy enough to capture schools entire. To sustain such bodies, ecosystems themselves would shift, bent under the weight of colossal appetites. War, too, would change. A sword carried by a giant would be longer than our lances, a bow capable of launching arrows like javelins. Battles would not be subtle, but seismic, every clash reverberating like earthquakes. To smaller humans, their conflicts would have been terrifying. Wars fought in thunders, leaving landscapes scarred as though by gods. And what of culture? Giants would not merely dominate with strength, they would shape art, religion, and philosophy to their scale.
Their myths might feature beings so vast that even they seemed small, cosmic titans who dwarfed mountains and seas. Their sense of time might differ too. Larger bodies often mean slower metabolism, longer lifespans. Imagine rulers who reigned not for decades, but for centuries. Dynasties stretching across eras we would measure as ages. To ordinary humans, such beings would appear divine. Perhaps that is why myths remember them as gods, as demigods, as ancestral rulers. A giant king standing before a crowd of smaller humans would be indistinguishable from divinity. His voice would boom like thunder, his presence overwhelm. The boundary between human and God would blur, carved in stone and memory as legends of titans and Nephilim. But a world of giants would not be without peril. Their size would make them vulnerable to scarcity. Crops might fail, game might dwindle, and famine would devastate them faster than it does us. Disease, too, could spread more ruthlessly through populations concentrated in colossal cities. Giants might have ruled brilliantly, but their fall could have been swift, undone by the very scale that made them mighty. And if smaller humans coexisted with them, the relationship would be fraught. Giants might enslave their smaller kin, using them as servants, laborers, or soldiers. Or perhaps they would treat them as curiosities, fragile cousins to be protected or ignored. But over time, numbers matter. We are adaptable, prolific, efficient. Giants might have ruled for a season, but in the long game of survival, smaller bodies require less, endure more, and reproduce faster. Eventually, the rulers would fall, and the ruled would inherit the earth. This imagined world explains much about myth, the awe, the fear, the mixture of reverence and hatred. These are the emotions of people living in the shadow of larger beings. They are the stories of survivors whispering of a time when humanity was not supreme, when others towered above us. To walk through such a world, for us, would be to feel like insects in a land of titans. A table would be higher than our heads, a chair broader than a house, a cup, a basin we could bathe in. Their cities would feel like mountains sculpted into impossible symmetry, their ruins like natural cliffs. And perhaps that is why megaliths still awe us. They resonate with the possibility of giants, with a scale that feels humanly impossible, yet hauntingly present. If giants ruled, then we are the aftermath. We are the smaller heirs carrying their memory in our myths, their shadows in our imagination. Their reign, whether real or only dreamed, is carved into our stories as a warning and a wonder. Strength alone is not eternal. Scale alone does not guarantee survival. Giants may have ruled, but the world ultimately belongs to the adaptable.
Every story of giants ends the same way, not with eternal rule, but with ruin. The Titans are cast into Tartarus, the Nephilim drowned by the flood, the Jotnar doomed to fall at Ragnarok. Myth tells us again and again that beings of enormous size cannot last. If giants once ruled the earth, their reign must have been brief, and their fall inevitable. Why? The answers lie in both nature and narrative. Start with biology. To live as a giant is to live on the edge. A 15-foot body requires immense calories. A single day's sustenance might equal the harvest of a small village. In times of abundance, such scale is majestic. But ecosystems are fragile. Climate shift, prey dwindles. The larger the creature, the less flexible it becomes. Dinosaurs flourished when vegetation was lush, but when disaster struck, their size became a liability. So too, perhaps, with giants, too big to fail, until they failed all at once. Then there is disease. Larger bodies mean slower recovery, greater stress on circulation, bones, and joints. A sickness that might hobble humans could devastate giants. If their populations were already limited, few in number, slow to reproduce, then one plague could erase them forever.
Evolution favors the prolific, not the mighty. The smaller, the faster breeding, the adaptable outlast the towering giants. Another possibility is competition. Imagine a world where giants and humans coexisted. At first, the giants would dominate, ruling through strength. But numbers matter. Humans, smaller and more efficient, could spread into niches giants could not. We can live on less, move faster, reproduce more. Over centuries, swarms of smaller beings might overwhelm their towering rivals, not with swords, but with persistence. The giants, starved and hunted, would dwindle. What remains of them survives only as myth, the memory of powerful overlords toppled by fragile cousins. Catastrophe also plays its part. Myths of giants almost always end in cataclysm, floods, wars, divine punishments. Perhaps these reflect real disasters: the Younger Dryas cooling, great tsunamis, volcanic eruptions that struck populations already vulnerable. Survivors would remember the fallen not as neighbors, but as titans undone by wrath of heaven or earth. Yet the fall of the giants is not only natural, it is narrative. Giants symbolize excess, and excess cannot endure. They eat too much, want too much, demand too much. Myths frame their collapse as justice. Zeus punishes the Titans, Yahweh destroys the Nephilim, Thor smashes the Jotnar. The moral is universal. Those who grow too large, too proud, too greedy will be struck down. Giants fall because they must. They are reminders that the world punishes arrogance, that survival belongs not to the strongest, but to the wise. What remains of them? Perhaps only bones misinterpreted, ruins reimagined, and stories retold. The giant becomes ancestor, villain, cautionary tale. Their fall becomes humanity's rise. Once we were small, but when the great fell, we inherited the earth. This inversion is central to myth. David defeats Goliath, order overcomes chaos, humanity survives where giants could not. Yet the question lingers: was their fall historical or purely symbolic? Did real copulations of unusually tall hominids vanish under climate stress, leaving faint echoes in folklore? Did tribes of robust warriors inspire myths of Nephilim? Did fossilized bones of mammoths and mastodons spark legends of fallen titans? Or are giants nothing more than archetypes, stories born to dramatize the dangers of excess? Whatever the truth, the fall of the giants matters more than their rise. It is the moment of transition, the hinge between a world ruled by enormity and a world shaped by subtlety. If they existed, their extinction cleared the path for us. If they never did, their myths still warn us that scale is fragile, that pride is peril. In their fall, giants gave us a lesson we cannot forget. The world belongs not to the biggest, but to those who endure.
Giants may have fallen, but stories insist that they never vanished completely. Again and again, traditions whisper of remnants, bloodlines lingering in royal houses, traces in extraordinary strength, echoes in our very DNA. Whether biological, cultural, or symbolic, the legacy of giants still courses through humanity like a shadow vein. Begin with the body. Human height varies widely, and though most cluster around an average, there are always outliers. Some families produce individuals consistently taller than their peers, as though an ancient inheritance still lingers. Gigantism, caused by hormonal imbalance, shows that the blueprint of the human body can stretch far beyond its usual limits. But what if not all cases are mere pathology? Could our fascination with unusual height hint at a deeper memory? That once extraordinary stature was not anomaly, but norm? Genetics offers subtle clues. Modern humans carry traces of Neanderthal and Denisovan DNA, fragments of ancient cousins who once lived alongside us. These interbreeding events left lasting impacts on our immune systems, even our skin and hair. What if hidden somewhere in our genomes are echoes of a taller, more robust branch of humanity? A lost cousin whose legacy survives not in fossils, but in blood. Science has yet to find such a lineage, but the possibility teases. Giants may live on in us, reduced but not erased. Culturally, the inheritance is undeniable. Kings and heroes are often described as larger than life, their bodies exaggerated in song and saga. Goliath looms over David not only as a man, but as a symbol of power. The Irish hero, Fón MacCumhaill, is remembered as a giant, said to have built the Giant's Causeway by hurling stones into the sea. In Polynesia, ancestors are sometimes described as immense beings who shaped the land itself. These stories suggest not only awe, but continuity. To claim descent from giants was to claim legitimacy, authority, divine right. Giants became the mythical ancestors of leaders, their size transmuted into cultural stature. Even in language, we preserve them. We speak of giant achievements, giant leaps, giant figures in history. We measure greatness by size, as though somewhere deep in our psyche, bigness still equals power. The metaphor persists because the archetype does. Giants live on not only in tales, but in the very structure of how we describe the extraordinary. But there is another kind of legacy: fear. Myths often portray giants not as noble ancestors, but as threats, beings to be defeated or destroyed. Perhaps this too is inheritance, a memory of smaller humans living in the shadow of stronger rivals. To tell stories of giants slain by clever heroes is to rehearse the triumph of survival, the victory of wit over brute force. In this sense, the legacy of giants is ambivalence. We admire their size, but we fear it too. Some traditions go further, insisting that giants still walk among us, hidden or disguised. Folklore tells of isolated mountains where immense beings dwell, of caves where sleepers of enormous size await awakening. Fringe theorists speculate about skeletons suppressed by institutions, bloodlines preserved in secret. Whether credible or not, these stories reflect a persistent intuition. Giants are not gone, only hidden. The world still carries their footprint. Psychologically, perhaps that is the truest legacy. Giants represent potential, the possibility that humanity is not fixed, that we can stretch beyond ourselves. To imagine them as ancestors is to imagine that we carry within us the capacity for more strength, more endurance, more greatness. To imagine them as rivals is to remind ourselves that survival requires cleverness, humility, and adaptability. Either way, they are inescapable. If giants once ruled, their fall gave us the earth. But if their blood still flows in us, then their legacy is not only past, it is present. Every unusually tall figure, every hero described as larger than life, every metaphor of greatness carries a spark of them. Giants live on in our bones, our stories, and our language, refusing to vanish completely. And perhaps that is the greatest irony. Giants, by definition, are too large to be forgotten. Even if their bodies turn to dust, even if their cities crumbled into soil, they remain immense in memory. Their legacy is not in stone or bone,
but in the way we still measure ourselves against them. We are smaller, yes, but we are their inheritors, carrying forward both their warning and their wonder.
In the age of satellites and supercomputers, giants should have faded into irrelevance. Science has mapped genomes, unearthed fossils, and reconstructed evolution with painstaking detail. And yet, giants still haunt us. They loom on YouTube thumbnails, in late-night documentaries, in paperbacks promising forbidden archaeology. The 21st century, for all its rationalism, cannot let them go. Why? Part of the answer lies in the mystery industry itself. Stories of giant skeletons discovered and hidden by the Smithsonian spread like wildfire online. Grainy photos of excavated skulls the size of barrels circulate on forums, often proven to be photo manipulations, but still shared millions of times. Each claim, debunked or not, feeds the suspicion that truth is being suppressed. After all, if giants never existed, why does the idea refuse to die? Television has seized on this hunger. Shows like Ancient Aliens or Search for Lost Giants weave tales of hidden histories, suggesting that our textbooks leave out crucial chapters. Giants, in this narrative, are not just anomalies, they are keystones of a suppressed truth, proof that humanity's past is stranger and richer than academia admits. To believe in giants is to believe that official history is incomplete, that mystery still lurks in the soil beneath our feet. And mystery is the currency of the modern imagination. In a world where GPS tells us exactly where we are and Google answers nearly every question, we crave unsolved puzzles. Giants offer that puzzle in perfect form, plausible enough to excite, impossible enough to endure. They sit in the sweet spot between science and myth, a riddle that refuses to close. There is also the psychological allure. Giants speak to something primal in us, the thrill of scale. We build skyscrapers, film movies with towering monsters, idolize athletes described as giants of the game. Our culture is obsessed with size, with pushing limits, with transcending the smallness of the human frame. Giants embody that obsession, turning metaphor into myth. To imagine them real is to imagine that our desire for greatness has ancient roots. But obsession has a darker side too. Giants are used to fuel conspiracies of control. Claims of hidden skeletons feed narratives that institutions deliberately suppress evidence to keep humanity ignorant of its true origins. Whether true or not, such stories flourish because they reflect distrust in authority. Giants become not just beings of the past, but weapons in modern battles over truth and power. Yet there is wonder here as well. Children's books still tell of Jack and the Beanstalk, of David and Goliath. Fantasy novels conjure towering races, from Tolkien's trolls to the frost giants of Marvel Comics. Giants dominate video games, films, and art because they are endlessly versatile. Terrifying monsters, noble guardians, tragic remnants of a forgotten age. They serve whatever role imagination requires. Even science cannot fully dislodge them. Paleontologists explain fossils. Endocrinologists explain gigantism. Anthropologists explain myths. But none of these explanations satisfy the human hunger for mystery. We want giants not only to exist, but to mean something. That our world is stranger than we are told. That the boundaries of evolution are wider. That humanity's place in history is less certain than we assume. Giants, whether real or not, let us believe in a bigger story. In the end, the modern obsession with giants is less about evidence than about possibility. They survive because they are useful.
not as facts, but as symbols of wonder, resistance, and scale. They remind us that the world is not yet finished, that mystery still hides in the cracks of knowledge. Giants haunt our culture because we need them to. And so they stride through YouTube videos and conspiracy forums, through fantasy novels and blockbuster films, larger than life in every sense. They are ancient beings reborn in modern media, refusing to be buried, towering over us still. Imagine the headline, 10-foot human skeleton unearthed, confirmed authentic. The shock would ripple across the globe in hours. Scientists would scramble, governments would convene, religions would weigh their scriptures with new urgency. For in that moment, giants would no longer belong to myth, they would belong to history. The scientific implications alone would be seismic. Our carefully mapped evolutionary tree would need rewriting. Where would giants fit? Were they a lost branch of Homo, like Neanderthals and Denisovans? Were they a parallel species, evolving under conditions we have not yet understood? Or, most unsettling, were they part of us, an ancient lineage whose blood still flows in our veins? Fossils would be hunted with feverish intensity. Every cave, every mound, every unexplored trench would become a battleground for discovery. Evolutionary biology would not collapse, but it would swell, expanding into directions once considered impossible. Archaeology, too, would transform. Sites like Baalbek, Stonehenge, or the walls of Sacsayhuaman would be reinterpreted under new eyes. Perhaps the massive stones really were practical for giant builders. Suddenly, megaliths would no longer be baffling anomalies, but sensible structures, scaled to the bodies of their makers. Entire libraries of interpretation would be rewritten, from Egypt's pyramids to the statues of Easter Island. Religion would feel the tremors most deeply. Traditions that speak of giants, Genesis, the Book of Enoch, Norse sagas, Hindu epics, would seem vindicated. Believers would point to scripture. The Nephilim lived, the Rakshasas fought, the Yutner fell. Faith would swell with the sense that myth was memory all along. At the same time, skeptics would scramble to reinterpret. Were the giants divine offspring or just another branch of humanity? The debate would ignite anew, sharper than ever. Culture at large would be swept by awe. Giants would become the obsession of a generation. Museums would unveil towering skeletons. Documentaries would dramatize their lives. Novels and films would resurrect their civilizations. Tourists would flock to excavation sites as pilgrims. Humanity would feel suddenly smaller, humbled by the knowledge that we were not the first rulers of the earth. And yet the discovery would also sting. Our narrative of progress, of humanity as the inevitable pinnacle of evolution, would be fractured. If giants once ruled, then we are not unique victors, but survivors. We inherited the earth not because we were destined to, but because they failed. The question would haunt us. If they fell, can we? The ethical questions would follow quickly. If giants are part of humanity, do we owe them remembrance, even honor? Should their bones be displayed in museums or reburied with dignity? If traces of their DNA remain, would genetic engineering attempt to resurrect them? The temptation would be great. Laboratories seeking to recreate a living giant, to walk once more in the world. But the consequences, scientific, ethical, even ecological, would be enormous. Most haunting of all would be the lessons. Giants, real and not metaphorical, would force us to ask why they vanished. Did they succumb to arrogance, overconsumption, or ecological collapse? If so, then their story is not only history, but warning. Their bones would not just be relics, but prophecies, reminders that greatness is fragile, that size and power cannot protect against extinction. What if giants also left culture behind? Tools scaled for their hands, inscriptions in languages long forgotten, ruins not yet recognized as theirs. Entire libraries would need new wings, entire philosophies new frameworks. The past would open like a wound, bleeding mysteries into the present. And what of identity? Humanity's image of itself would be forever altered. we pride ourselves on being the tallest, strongest, most intelligent beings to walk upright. Giants would strip that pride away. We would no longer be alone at the summit, we would be successors, perhaps lesser heirs. The psychological shock would be immense. We are not the first, not the greatest, not the inevitable. We are simply what remains. But perhaps that realization would be healthy. To accept giants as real would humble us, remind us that our story is not singular, but part of a vast, branching experiment called evolution. It would force us to see ourselves not as destiny fulfilled, but as one path among many, lucky survivors walking in the footprints of fallen titans. So what would it mean if giants were true? It would mean that myth is not always fantasy, that memory can outlast stone, that the impossible may only be improbable. It would mean that our history is stranger than we dared hope, and our future more fragile than we care to admit. Giants, proven real, would change everything: science, religion, culture, even the story we tell about ourselves. And perhaps that is why deep down we both crave and fear the discovery. Giants, if they lived, would not only reshape the past, they would reshape us.
The story of giants ends where it began, not with certainty, but with wonder. For all the myths, all the bones, all the whispers in scripture and folklore, no definitive proof has been unearthed. Giants remain suspended between truth and tale, between archaeology and imagination. And perhaps that is why they endure. If a skeleton were displayed tomorrow in a museum, 12 feet tall, authenticated beyond doubt, the mystery would be solved, and much of the magic would vanish. Giants would be absorbed into textbooks, cataloged, explained. We would gape at their size, yes, but soon they would stand behind glass like any other fossil, their mystery reduced to data. The power of giants lies not in resolution, but in possibility. The open question keeps them alive. Were they a branch of humanity lost to time? Were they exaggerations of real encounters with tall tribes or robust hominids? Were they misinterpretations of mammoth bones magnified through the lens of imagination? Or are they purely symbolic, archetypes born from humanity's struggle with scale and chaos? Each possibility carries its own truth. If they were real, then our history is deeper, stranger, and more complex than we admit. If they were exaggerated memories, then myths preserve history in their own way, blurred, poetic, but not false. If they were only symbols, then giants reveal our psyche, our awe at nature, our fear of excess, our need to measure ourselves against something larger. What makes giants eternal is that we do not choose among these options. We hold them all at once. They are beings of bone, beings of story, beings of mind. They stride through evolution, religion, art, and imagination with equal ease. They belong to science and to myth, and neither can fully claim them. This ambiguity is not weakness, but strength. It keeps the door open. It allows each generation to reinterpret them. To the ancients, giants were adversaries of gods. To medieval chroniclers, they were echoes of biblical Nephilim. To modern seekers, they are suppressed truths, conspiracies, or genetic puzzles. And to us, here and now, they're metaphors for fragility and power, warnings and dreams. Perhaps the most important question is not, did giants exist, but why do we need them to? Why does humanity, across continents and centuries, insist on telling stories of towering beings who walked before us? The answer may be simple. Giants remind us that we are not the measure of all things. They force humility. They whisper that greatness is relative, that we are small, that we are temporary. Or perhaps the answer is even simpler. Giants are fun to imagine.
They delight us because they stretch possibility. They let us picture a world where steppes are thunder, where kings cast shadows like mountains, where the earth itself trembles beneath colossal feet. They make the world bigger, stranger, more wondrous. And so the question remains, open. Maybe giants never walked the earth, except in myth. Maybe they once did, their bones turned to dust, their memory preserved only in fireside tales. Maybe they still do, hidden in caves, in mountains, in the corners of imagination that science has not yet mapped. We cannot say for certain, and that uncertainty is the point. The story of giants does not close, it lingers. It leaves us standing at the edge of possibility, gazing into the distance, asking the same words Plato once used for Atlantis, the same words whispered in every myth of lost races and vanished beings. What if?